systems go. Clear for liftoff. What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, aka ToeTagginTambo, back for week 17 of Leverage Lane. We're calling this the final of the year. Got my man Alex Blickle here with me as always. Hope everyone's got to enjoy their holidays with friends, family, food, drinks, and whatever makes you happy. But we'll be back. We're going to talk through this slate really quick. We're back. We're going to talk through 9 games. We're going to talk about it from a single entry GPP perspective. As usual, we do have a big announcement, but we're not giving you that right away. We love to tease, so we'll save that one till the end. It's exciting, but then also a lot to talk about on this slate with some of the big games and all of that. So we'll talk about an ownership perspective. What does the common build look like? How can we leverage that common build? And then, of course, at the end, we'll get to our leverage lane. Mr. Alex Blickle, we're back. What's going on, my man? How you doing?
We are really, really fun. Like last week and a half, if you will, of the NFL was a really fun weekend. Honestly, Tambo, it's been such a weird season. Like I've had a really good props here. Had a really, really good showdown here. Just had a great showdown this past Monday. My main slates have been completely uneventful since week 1. So hopefully we can buck that trend. Have a couple tickets now in these last few weeks. So I'm going to need to turn around that way.
Yeah, it can easily turn around, though, because I know some of the tickets you've been picking up, Mega Millies and Ultimates. What do you got for tomorrow? Do you got any for the Ultimate?
No, I don't. So I have a Mega Millie 4,444 ticket, but they don't have one of those this week. So
no, they're running that big 33.33 this week with 2.5 up top. So I'm debating what to do with that. I only have one ticket for it, but I kind of feel like maybe I'll throw an extra one. We'll see.
I mean, I think this is kind of like a good conversation topic too. I have tried extremely hard every single week to get Mega Millie tickets. I haven't tried that hard to get the main event tickets for the point that you kind of just made, which is if you only have one and you're going up against, the best DFS players and they have 30, whatever, or more, it's going to be really, really tough because of the types of, inverse correlation type things that they can do in those lineups where you really are at a disadvantage when you only have one. And so I feel like, that disadvantage is smaller in a smaller contest like the Mega Millie usually is. The Mega Millie usually has something like 700 people. And I think this ultimate main event contest is over 3,000 if I saw correctly. So I'm kind of curious your thoughts there. Do you kind of pay attention to that when you're looking for tickets? Because I think why try for a ticket into a contest that you don't feel like you have an edge in?
Yeah, I think for me, it's you definitely try to get more, or I could always buy more if I wanted to, but I don't typically. And, usually it goes a little bit better. This has been a rough outing. I looked, I'm down a few $100s playing for these tickets, and I only got one out of it typically. But I mean, look, you guys know how this goes, and you particularly know how this goes from the ticket streets. Those seconds, we're just numb to them. Like, it doesn't even matter, or third, or seventh when the top 6 get one. Like, I have a bunch of those, so I could have easily had 5 to 7 tickets. Last year I had 5 in it, so kind of that was the thought process going in. It doesn't always work out, but I'm very comfortable still playing it from that perspective. I think your points and advice are definitely sound, and certainly for somebody just playing it off the streets, or what do you want to call it? Like just jumping in to jump in. It's not always the best case, but I'll be more than fine just fading a ton of good stuff that other people are going to love on the slate that I'm just not going to go there, and I'll play it completely different, because if not, you're not going to give yourself really any opportunity. Anybody with max entries is going to have whatever your second best idea is typically going to be covered still, as is your third, fourth, fifth. So not saying to get completely out of the, into the weeds, but definitely got to get different than what the rest of the competition is doing. And we'll talk about that on this very show. So listen, let's start here. Last week, I will say this, we did talk about this last week. We started with a game, and we're going to do it again this week. We're going to start with, of course, the Arizona at Cincy game. It's not often you've got the Bengals with a big total like this, over 30 implied team total at home. Joe Burrow, we saw what he did last week, but we did start with the Lions-Pittsburgh game last week. And what's interesting about this week, so the Lions game, a lot of people were chasing, and not necessarily, it was still a good game, but I'm saying people were chasing what they missed out on, right? They didn't get to Goff, Amon-Ra, and Jameson Williams to break the slate the week before. So there was like, oh, we can go back there now with Pittsburgh. It's a perfect setup. DK Metcalf's too cheap, et cetera, et cetera. Usually when something like that busts, people aren't super high on it. But realistically, I think, Alex, at least what they're chasing is everybody missed out on Burrow throwing for 4 touchdowns and proving himself down. So now they're like, oh, and the McBride against Cincy stuff. And you just add it all together. It seems like the perfect storm. So what is your thoughts? We'll start there with this Arizona Cincy game. This definitely looks like on paper the place to be this week for only 9 games, et cetera, et cetera. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, the Detroit-Pittsburgh game last week, it did have a somewhat clear path to failing, which was Goff gets pressured because his pressure splits are among the most severe in the entire NFL, where like when he's pressured, he's not good. When he isn't pressured, he's great. Now, I kind of looked at that matchup last week and said, hey, there's no TJ Watt, and thought the chance that he gets pressured all game are pretty low, but Pittsburgh ended up being able to do that. So it wasn't shocking to see that game fail. When I look at this Arizona-Cincinnati game, there isn't a clear path to the game underwhelming, right? And so I don't necessarily want to play any of it, but I also don't know what fading this game looks like. And, it's really, really tough in that way. So I'm very much looking forward to talking through this one with you, because I don't have a clear picture of if I'm fading this, how am I fading it? But also I don't have a clear picture of if I'm playing it, how am I playing it? Because Jamar Chase is going to be like over 40% owned. I think Chase Brown is now overpriced. That to me, like if anyone's chasing any part of this game, it's any ownership that Chase Brown gets over $7,000 and an almost 50-50 split with Pirine is solely because he ran hot on touchdowns last week. Otherwise, there's no chance that he'd have this ownership. So, yeah, it's a really tough game to kind of think through and figure out either how to play or how to fade.
Yeah, I think one of the things about this one, I liked your comment there just around this setup of with last week's, you could actually see a path to failure, and this one you don't necessarily see it as easily. For example, to be like, well, I actually don't see how this would happen. So to me, what that says, and I agree with you 100%, is that that's the possibility. But if you were looking to be on it, it feels like you kind of got to be on it and then look for ways to get different, whether it's a super over game stack. But even then, those start to pick up a little bit of steam. It probably has to be something with like a Pirine or a Gesicki or a Yoshi Voss, or double tight end with Gesicki and McBride or something along those lines. I think people will definitely still get there. But I think one of the things that you see in these high scoring games, and we've seen it in the past with Buffalo and Cincy games before, where they can still get there, which we are saying we still see happening, but it's so spread out, or it's randomness of who gets it, this, that. And like last week, even people were so happy to be on Chase Brown until they realized you needed Chase Brown with his quarterback, because 3 of them got thrown to the week before. Like ETN Jr. finally comes through, no Tootin. And it's like, oh, but you need him with Trevor Lawrence. It's like, so how often are people setting this up? Sometimes they're actually setting up to avoid that. So one thing for me is like, if I'm not in on this game, I don't know. You tell me, because you're usually the best at figuring this out. But like the Jamar Chase with McBride secondary stack, I know there's a ton of different quarterbacks you can fit it with, right? You could get to some other quarterbacks on the slate and cheaper stacks. But how bad is that with the fact that if those two actually sealing out on this slate, that's pretty well set up that you're going to need Burrow or Brissett at that point, wouldn't you?
Yeah, 100%. Like that to me, it's kind of a great place to start here is, once again, as we've talked about kind of all season, you either should play the game or fade the game, not try to find the middle ground. And a lot of the time when we've had this conversation this year, it's turned out that we should totally play it. Like 2 weeks ago, the Detroit game, you totally played it. You did really well. Last week, we said the same thing about the Detroit-Pittsburgh game. Well, guess what? If you faded the game, or specifically if you used either Gainwell or Warren as a one-off and just said, I want the game to fail because Pittsburgh actually controls things instead of Detroit, which then makes Pittsburgh more aggressive, and that's how the game goes off. Like that would have been spectacular. And so this idea of fully embrace and game stack the crap out of it, or hope the game fails in a clear way, like that's just, it's so clearly been the way to go all season. And I think even though we don't see the path to failure this week, we should still take that same thought. And so maybe the answer is Michael Carter only, and hope the Arizona defense actually slows down Burrow a little bit, or if they give up production, it's, as you said, like Yosivash or Drew Sample, like those guys are scoring the touchdowns instead of Chase, Higgins, Chase Brown, and then you're getting the Michael Carter touchdown on the ground instead of Brissett throwing the ball and now if Arizona actually has a lead, you're not getting the Brissett drop back, 47 pass attempt type game that he's crushed in so often this year. So yeah, I think that's probably my lean is playing the game in that way. But like I said, I don't feel like super strongly about any part of this game. I just know it's likely to succeed, and there isn't a clear story that I know I can tell for how the game fails.
Yeah. So a couple things on that I'll add. Just, I love all those thoughts, and the chat's talking about a little bit is this is where people get it confused. Cause like, oh, everyone's just going to overstack this game. But some of the names you mentioned, like the chat talked about Elijah Higgins, not just T Higgins. What about Higgins squared? What about the Drew Samples, the Yoshi Voss? That's where people, especially in single entry, will get scared, right? They'll say, I'm not doing it. That's just too, they'll say things like, that's too aggressive, or that's too, you don't need to do that. In single, you need to do what you need to do in the end. Like if whatever the highest score is, remember, there's going to be someone playing single entry that isn't scared. And when you're saying scared money don't make money, like that's the thing. It's typically true. Somebody's going to do it. And if they got you, they got you. Now, I want to talk about it the other way, because again, not saying it's going to happen again or all this, but I guess if you were truly believing in the Bengals, I guess you could take it from a perspective of last week in the Detroit spot. We said, well, what if it is Gibbs getting these long touchdowns on the ground that would then take away and pull from others? Now, I don't think Chase Brown's going to be underowned or overowned. I think he's going to be somewhere, Goldilocks zone right there, just right in the middle. But I do think that would have to be the thought. Like, is it like a Chase Brown with a Bengals D? Is it, and do something different that way? Is it a Higgins one-off? And you're like, you know what? Even though Higgins having the big game would probably be with Burrow, most those Higgins stacks are going to be game stacks. And what if it is just Higgins has a 8 for 105 one game, and he's like that I can get to? Mike on the other, right? Cardinals defense. Shit, we just saw the Millie Maker, the $20 Millie Maker. I know we talked single entry GPP focus, but the Millie Maker last week had Bowers, Genty, and the Vegas D versus everyone was just on the Houston D at 4K. It was like a complete way to flip it, as I'm going to take the opposite D and two guys from that side with it. So anything can happen. It's a 9-game slate. Do you have any other thoughts about how, like, or are you saying this to the truth of what you've already said of like, are you sticking to what you would always say and just you're going to avoid the game because then you could just not play anything and hope that it spreads out or that you don't need what you need?
Yeah. And I think like the point that I'll reiterate there is the script where this game goes the most nuclear is pretty clearly Cincinnati builds a lead, Arizona gets there in garbage time. It's the same script that Arizona has hit in so many times since Jacoby Brissett took over. And so if you're hoping this game fails, I think you want it the other way around, where you want Arizona kind of controlling things. You want Arizona to control the ball, to keep the Cincinnati offense off the field, but you also want them trying to slow things down offensively instead of trying to speed things up offensively. And so in that script, I do think it makes sense to play a $5,200 Michael Carter, who did clearly have the lead last week, had 11 carries, looked decent running the ball, even had one explosive run. And we know how bad Cincinnati has been against running backs all season. They're boosting opponent running back production by like 8 fantasy points per game, which is just a crazy high number. So I do think Carter is a good play, not just because he's actually a decent value this week at $5,200, which is not something I have said at any point this year about a Cardinals running back since James Conner got hurt, but it actually is a good spot. But then you also get the benefit of the script in which he succeeds likely mutes the overall game environment compared to what people are looking for.
Yeah, the chat asked about Samaje Perine in a blowout. What do you think about that?
I don't even like, which direction are you hoping that Perine gets next to run from a blowout? And I don't know that he'd get extra carries in a blowout. It might be Taj Brooks at that point. I'm not really interested in Perine. I think the way you use Perine, honestly, like might be just a total overstack of this game where you're hoping that he gets 2 touchdowns, 1 receiving, 1 rushing, and it's because Cincinnati scored like 40 some points and the touchdowns had to come somewhere, and there's just only so many ways that you can allocate all those touchdowns. Maybe he runs hot this week instead of Chase Brown.
That's what I was going to say. I'd actually rather it in like a Burrow, Carter, Perine original setup to make cheap plays within the game that boosted up and then get those other guys fit in by those and hope that it is like a back and forth. That's how I would build that. Or
something like Burrow, Chase, McBride, and then P. Ryan. And now you're saying, okay, I'm using the most expensive combination possible from the stack, but then I'm actually turning it into a little bit more affordable because I'm using a $4,400 running back, whatever P. Ryan is. So I think that's the only way that I consider using P. Ryan, but it does seem like a decent way to do it.
Now I got one more thing I want to talk about, but before I do, that relates to this game, but one still within this game I want to talk about. The other is more from a DFS perspective, but just within this game, what about flipping the build to the Brissett side? And any thoughts on like if it is the McBride 2 touchdown game, that's already 2 for Brissett. Now you got to pick in who do you want to have with them. But what about like Brissett, Carter, one of Michael Wilson, Marv Harrison with Trey McBride, and then a T. Higgins on the other side or something like that, and do it differently in that sense? Could you see that?
So the only issue that I have with this is I don't think, like, usually when we say flip the build, we're talking about something that really makes ownership, we're talking about a much, much lower owned side of the game. And I don't think you're totally getting that here. We have Burrow projected at 20% in single entries, 10% for Brissett. So like there is a meaningful difference there. We're talking about 50% the ownership of the other guy. But if you're using Brissett, you've got to use Trey McBride, right? And we've got Trey McBride at 24%. So how much are you saving in that regard? I think the only way you would do this is if you felt really confident about either Michael Wilson or Marvin Harrison Jr. The problem is, number one, I don't feel confident about either of them because the roles are really murky. I've seen some people make the point that last week it was the first time that Michael Wilson stayed in kind of the lead dog role with Harrison on the field, but Harrison was limited. So if Harrison isn't limited this week, I'm not 100% sure that it's going to be the same story. So there's that aspect of it. But then also Cincinnati, as bad as they have been against running backs and tight ends, and let me bring up the actual data here, they've been pretty good against wide receivers. So they're boosting opponent running back production by 6.7 fantasy points per game. Opponent tight end production by 8.3 fantasy points per game, which continues to be like a historically high number for any position, let alone the tight end. They are hurting wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 production by 3.6 and 2.3 fantasy points per game, respectively, on the year. That's using our DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data over at FTN. So if you do have conviction on Michael Wilson or Marvin Harrison Jr., I would have to ask why, because the matchup's not good, and the role is just so uncertain for both.
Yeah, we'll see. It sounds like I think Marv Harrison's going to play anyway. Like I think that the way it seems, no setbacks or anything, that it seems like this will be full go versus last week, like I said, could have still been a little bit limited depending. And we have ownership projections, so we already know this stuff. It's not going to be more owned. It's going to be the Burrow side and Chase, and then McBride and whatever. And like you said, I think one of the more interesting things, at least if you're doing that, is, and it's not ideal from the data standpoint, but to the point of Wilson and Harrison just aren't going to get the ownership as much. Like most people are going to go Burrow, Chase, McBride, and then see what else they can fit in. It's not saying they'll always fit in Higgins, but they're going to see, okay, is it Chase Brown? Is it T. Higgins? Is it Yoshi Voss? On the other side, is it Michael Carter or whatever, and try and get a game stack that way. I don't think those Arizona, I think of all the players in this game, Gesicki and the 2 receivers stay lower. What do you see on Michael Carter right now in single entry? Because I could see it coming up a little bit the more we get to what makes this game stack work. It feels like people feel comfortable about him, and I see him getting mentioned a lot as well with that matchup. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, we've got him at 13%. I think I'm on the higher side of the industry, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did take off a little bit. There are a couple guys that I kind of feel that way. Where like there's a large difference between what I was expecting to see and what I currently am seeing in the ownership front. Where there's a very good chance where, especially we're not the only ones doing a show today. So shows around the industry today, if they all say, hey, why is this guy under 10%? There's a good chance that guy becomes 20 or 25%. Michael Carter is one of those where he's right now, again, we've got him at 13. I think my numbers actually spit out something like 8 or 9% for him. And I just manually boosted it up because I don't think it could possibly be that low. But also the same with him. Like I wouldn't be surprised if it got to 20, 25, just because he's a very clear way to play the favorite game in a bit of a contrarian way, especially if ownership projections around the industry say that he's going to be really contrarian. if he was, if everyone looked at his ownership projection and saw 25%, people would say, oh, I don't want to play at 25% Michael Carter. But if 25% of the field thinks that Michael Carter is a good play at 8%, and that's the ownership projection they're looking at, then he has a chance to get to 20, 25%, something like that. So we'll see. But that's kind of one of my favorite things to do leading up to Sunday is kind of reading the tea leaves on ownership in this way.
That's the contest sims in a nutshell. The year of 2024 leading into this current year of 2025, almost to 2026, how much the contest sims have changed. Where it's like, oh, the sims say it's good, I got to play it now, and everyone jumps on it. And then the numbers you were going up against that made it good were like actually way off, and you were using bad numbers. So the key is having good ownership. But two things then now you got me on that are DFS related, but not this. One, you've probably heard me talk about it in the past in the PGA realm, which is the lazy weeks. You can't ask for a more lazy week in the NFL than week 17, the week before the sort of the end of the season, week 18. Just that lull before the playoffs, all that, but happens to happen during a lot of people celebrating Christmas week and the holidays of some kind throughout this season with friends and family and drinks and fun and all these different things where they just, what does this show say? All right, I'm going to do that. And or what is the ownership? I'm going to do that or go against that. So it's kind of a setup where I do see this staying really popular. And we'll talk in a little bit about how to leverage the common bill, but I think that was some good points we made there. The other thing I'll bring up quickly, the second one I was going to hit on earlier, Alex, was the slate dynamics as a whole. Like if you're on Chase and McBride, I get it, but you should be on this game. Then when you're doing that, I know there's only 8 other games and it's not an 11 or a 12 or a 13 gamer, but there is massive pieces you're leaving on the table now. You're not really likely to get to those 2 plus JSN. I'm not saying you can't. Mm-hmm. I get people understand. I can understand the math. I'm just telling you, most people with those 2 in their lineup are leaving out JSN, are leaving out Achane, are leaving out Jonathan Taylor, right? Yeah. There's definitely some other big boy options. Barkley, James Cook, ETN Jr., wherever you want to go with it. They're not leaving out Genty. I'll tell you that much. We'll get there in a second. That's part of another conversation, but just a thought around like, that's where we're going to be going. I think when we get there, right? Is this the thought of like, right away, most of those builds are on a game stack and they're not able to get to a lot of these other quote unquote studs on the slate that definitely could have slate breaking potential. And that's what would leave something like this in the dust, even if this doesn't fail, like your point earlier, but it just is good and it's not great or phenomenal or needed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think one of the really kind of key points to understand about this slate and how it compares and how it differs more specifically to a lot of the slates this year is the kind of the theme of the season, if you will, has been kind of a return to paying up at running back instead of wide receiver and tight end. And of course there have been exceptions to that rule, like Puka has been mega chalk sometimes this year. St. Brown has been super chalky. Jamar Chase has been super chalky, even JSN at times this year. So it's not like we've never had people paying up for wide receiver. But the reason why we've got a Jamar Chase this week projected for over 40% and McBride pushing 25, even though he's, at a price where so far this year, whenever McBride has been this expensive or more expensive, he's been like 8%, 12% at the most. Now we've got him projected around 25%. It's because we have Bijan, CMC, Jahmyr Gibbs all off of the main slate. And those have been the 3 guys that people are so determined to pay up for. So the fact that they're off the slate is opening up the potential for people to say, okay, this week I'm going to prioritize spending money on my stack or on these one-off wide receivers and tight ends who are all the way at the top of the board instead of paying up for the expensive running back. And that just makes it a very different slate dynamic than a lot of the weeks that we've played recently.
Yeah, agreed. And that's where I think the standout's going to come in a little bit when we get there. Now, sticking with just the common build and the ownership and where we're seeing it now, you already talked about it with Burrow. You talked about it with that game stack. We just mentioned it, so I might as well go there next. It's kind of a twofold, I guess, it's the Raiders versus the Giants. I know there's talks about like the Max Crosby pissed off because they're wanting to hold him out for the last 2 games now. And I talked about it last week. I thought it was incredible when the reporter tried to ask him about the playing for the number 1 pick. And he's like, you don't ask me that. He's like, I'm trying to be the best defensive end in the league. I don't give a shit. I'm playing and I'm smashing these dudes. And then all of a sudden the management ownership is like, actually you might not be playing, buddy. We're going to decide that. And he's pissed off about that, I guess. But Genty at 6,100, huge week last week, right? So of course he's going to be popular this week. And then you got Bowers moved to the IR previous to that. So it's like you got the Michael Mayer experience again. It's not Halloween any longer, but it's a different holiday. But $2,500, you got Michael Mayer down there. And then I don't know if people love the other side, but people always seem to want to play a little bit of Robinson, right? They're fine with it. And maybe even Tyrone Tracy Jr. because of the way it's been for the Giants. So I guess that's the best place to go next. But what's your thoughts on this stack or this setup and using these guys as pieces to make everything else work?
Yeah. So let's start with the Genty chalk because it's going to be massive. And particularly it's going to be massive if Trevion Henderson does play for New England, because what we were initially projecting was like 45% Genty, 45% Ramondre Stevenson. If we don't get the Stevenson chalk because Trevion's back, it might be like 60% Genty, and then no one else at the running back position coming anywhere close to him. So there are a couple things here, and I should shout out. I wish I remember which subscriber from my Discord actually made this point, but they shut down Bowers because they don't want to win this game. They shut down Crosby because they don't want to win this game. Are we sure that they're just going to force feed Genty all game and let their now best offensive player who's active just have this like full role, and especially if they're leading, are they going to let him kind of go get them a win? I don't know what the answer to that question is. So it is a bit of uncertainty in that regard. But more importantly, I think the matchup with the Giants is phenomenal, and it's especially good for explosive runs. But we are still talking about a guy who has just two 20-plus yard runs on the season. Should we be 60% owned, confident in a guy who only has 2 explosive plays all season in the run game? And, in the passing game, it's similar. He had a stretch of 3 consecutive games with 8 targets in November, but he only had 2 targets last week. The fact that one of them was a 60-yard touchdown is really affecting that ownership a lot more than I think it should. So I am kind of the opinion that Genty is kind of a pretty clear picture now where he is a really boom or bust guy, and he's super dependent on these explosive plays that he's very capable of producing, but is not going to produce them at a high rate. So when he's 6% owned, whatever he was last week, he's a very good play. When he's 60% owned like he is this week, he's probably not a good play by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, we have him at one of our highest optimal rates I've seen all season on the Stone over at Chip Nation, but it's like also one of the most negative leverage standpoints because the ownership, and then you take that to single entry and it goes even further. And I always talk about this, like when it's such a high optimal rate, I get it and we know why that is, but when there's talking points around it, and to your point, we'll spend some more time on this when we get to the second segment about ways to leverage it, but just of note, we've seen. It was earlier this season. Everyone will say, oh, like Miami's so bad against the run. It was Bijan, and then there was a late scratch of Drake London. And it doesn't matter how bad the other defense is sometimes. If they just say, listen, we're going to make quarterback Geno Smith throw the ball to Trey Tucker, Jack Besh, and Tyler Lockett from 2016 with Michael Mayer and just see what happens. And then the Raiders say, it's not going so well early on. Now we can kind of wave that flag a little bit and try and go after this pick and do whatever. I'm not saying it will happen, but everything that people are automatically adding to it, it's already all baked in. So the only thing that happens after it's baked in, another common theme we've talked about all season, the only thing that happens that's important in DFS is if it's already all baked into the projection and of the points, then all that can happen now is the ownership can get out of control. And that's when we're making the case. Now, again, he's the way he is for a reason. It's, people are playing him for the reason. We're making a case, and we'll get to that in segment number 2. If you wanted to be off of him and why, there's definite reason to it, but that's just a key talking point. Let's, instead of going to that route, because we're not there yet, finishing this out for the common build, what about Michael Mayer? Do you think it's a double tight end common build to make that original game stack work, where it's those 2 as a combo pack? Then you get your McBride and your Chase in there and pick your Burrow, go from there? Like, what's your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think Meyer's going to be popular. The one thing I'll say, this also, of course, relates to Genty, is we should remember that this is a 4:00 game. There are only 2 4:00 games this week. So you're going to have a ton of information from the early games to determine whether you can and should use the chalk Genty or whether you need to get different at that point in time. So that will, number one, mean that we can still play him even though he's this popular if we if we do think that he's a high probability play. But it also means that that's a chunk of the field who otherwise wouldn't have played him that will now play him because they feel like they have the license to, because they have the late swap option with him. So that could also make him even more popular than he would already have been. So it's another tough decision. It's definitely not an easy slate here in week 17.
Yeah, one thing I want to say about that, at least, and I know we haven't fully got there yet. I want to round it out and then we'll get there, to the talking about leveraging the common build. But just one thing about that is the 2-game factor. I'm glad you brought that up, because you look, if you're on the Cincy Arizona game and it busts and you got Genty left, like, yeah, definitely a bad spot to be at that point, because like you're just collecting. I mean, you don't really have much else. You should swap it. I'm sure that you can literally just put in Tracy Jr. at way less ownership and just see what happens. So it's not about that to me as much as the opposite effect. I actually am, again, we're close to that anyway now, Alex, but I will say this. I really don't care about his projection as much to say that, like, if I was golden in the morning, I'm actually not positive I would flip things around to get to Genty on. I mean, obviously there's the blocker effect. I'm just saying I'm not as high on the spot as other situational stuff. It depends on the build, of course. I'm just talking about from one shot, the deal, looking at it like we talked about earlier. I'm not 100% sure I would overextend, at least is a better way to put it, to get myself there. If I had tons of flexibility, I would probably do it. Yes. But I'm saying from everything you mentioned, I'm not certain that would be the case. Like if I had a Barkley lineup or a Cook lineup that I already liked, I actually might stand on that. And yes, they're projected better anyway, but I mean more of with 2 plays left. I would look at the Genty version, but I might hold pat on what I got with Cook and somebody else, like a Cook Tucker versus moving it to a Genty something else. I would probably still hold it just because that's just a piece I'll give you that I'm doing. You don't have to do that. It's just what I'm thinking about right now.
Or it could be like, Barkley and Meyer versus Genty and Goddard, something like that.
Right.
I think one other point that I'll make here, and this is already kind of getting into leveraging the common build, but if I had Genty, I think the only way that I would do it, well, I should start by saying what most people I think will do is they'll have Genty, and then if they need to pivot, they'll pivot to Tyrone Tracy just in the same game, saying, okay, well, what if it's the Giants who end up running all over them instead? Things of that nature. What I would rather do is I'd rather have Genty in the flex so that my pivot could be to Devontae Smith instead of Tyrone Tracy. Because if you're using Tracy, like, what is his ceiling? 22, 23, 24, something like that. Whereas we've seen Devontae Smith go for 35 plus. So if I had to make a swap late, I would much prefer to be swapping to Devontae than to Tyrone Tracy.
Yeah, and someone brings it up here. I mean, definitely, in cash, people, you're playing Genty. Like, that's just what people are doing. And do what you want. I'm just saying, like, it's clearly a cash lock for anybody looking at cash lineups and things like that. That's going to be for most people playing cash at the highest level. Genty's going to be a lock in that. We're talking more from a single entry GPP perspective. And even Alex's point there, which I just want to round out the common build first, but I'll say for 2 seconds, is like, that might not be possible for people, in a certain instance or way, because if they do have McBride with Meyer on top of Genty, it's like clearly they're flexes. And now they can still find ways to flip it around. Maybe they've got an extra piece in there that can make the move, but I'm just noting it is like, it's not always going to be possible for people with the common build. Is there anything else about the common build that you want to hit on here that I'm sort of missing, forgetting, or anything else you're seeing that stands out that we want to make sure we fit into this segment before we move on?
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that we've got a ton of ownership on Jacksonville as well. So like we're actually projecting Lawrence to be more popular than Joe Burrow. And we have Jacoby Myers at like 35% in single entries. So there's going to be a lot of ownership there. And then I think the only other thing that I would say is despite the fact that we do have 2 really, really popular quarterbacks for once, like we still have Brissett, May, Shuck, and Dart all over 7% as well. All theoretically could be at least 10%. So it's simultaneously a little bit spread out and really concentrated on those 2 offenses. But maybe even the more important point is it's not necessarily the quarterbacks, but we could also see, major chalk from the Patriots wide receivers given the injuries, where Diggs and Kyle Williams might end up really popular. Hunter Henry is probably going to be really popular. We could see Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson be really popular. So there are kind of a lot of options, a lot of chalky options that we're choosing from particularly among pass catchers this week.
Yeah, we'll get there for sure. I think my takeaway would just be like, how do you want to integrate the conversation of the Jacksonville stuff? Because it's super important to touch on. I definitely think there's a couple of hilarious outcomes on this slate, and one would certainly be the Genty piece that we mentioned. Like, of course, last week he has that big game, so now it comes back to it. But the most hilarious to me would be if Trevor Lawrence, he had those 4 good weeks. Then everyone said, oh, he's finally facing a real team against Denver. There's no way he's going to have a big game.
Yeah.
He goes out and does it against Denver. Well, now how wouldn't he do it against Indy? And that would be the most hilarious outcome, is when he doesn't do it against Indy, when it's like that would be one that you think would be the most common. But I don't know, like the most possible now at this point after everything you've seen from him. But we'll get that. But is there any other way you want to integrate that? Like, do you actually think there's a chance people could go something like, I don't know if this even fully fits, but like Lawrence, Jacoby Myers with Michael Mayer, Jamar Chase, McBride, Genty? Is that kind of the setup you could see where people land on that even more than the Burrow version?
Yeah, I could see that. I could also see people double stacking him either with ETN, since ETN just caught 3 touchdowns from him a few games ago, which is still so insane. Brenton Strange is going to get some ownership of the tight end position.
Yeah.
But I think the main way to integrate this into the conversation of what is the common build is just understanding that because there are so many chalky pass catching options, because there are so many quarterbacks that people can go to, we are going to see a bit more diversity in just the overall like build structure, which also is true because, again, going back to the original point of this, the stud running backs just aren't as appealing this week as they've been most weeks this season when Bijan, McCaffrey, and Gibbs have been parts of slates, which again is going to give people, it's freeing people up to build in whatever way they want, instead of feeling like, okay, I've got to find a way to get these expensive running backs, which has given us more predictable builds throughout the year.
Yeah. Another thing too, Aaron Smith brings up is that, Jack's Indy in a dome with a lot of other winter weather spots, and even like the Philly Buffalo game, which we didn't talk a ton about. That's a very low total for those two teams going up against each other. But Philly as good as most, as more than most, I should say, as good as anybody. But look behind you at the helmet there is like, just thinking about the spot of that. They just like to run the ball and throw short chop throws over the middle. It's like that just shuts the clock down pretty quickly and moves fast. And obviously Buffalo content to do the same, especially when they get into these colder weather games. It's just Allen, Cook, whatever else these short throws are, and can pass it along and move it. But one thing I will say about the Jacks Indy, though, is if you go like Lawrence, Jacoby, Strange, whatever, I feel like it's going to be more Jamar Chase being left out, because I think then people could move to Jonathan Taylor, but they might still want McBride in there or something along those lines. And if they had Genty, maybe it's Strange instead of Meyer, but they can get down a little bit from from Jamar Chase to Taylor and make that work within a game stack there. So I do think that's somewhat interesting, but I don't know if that's like, I don't know. Do you think it's like really, is it going to leverage the common build, or is it going to feel like that's kind of just the secondary version of it?
So I wouldn't say that I think that Chase can get left out of builds like that, because I think one of the kind of themes that we've seen this season is when people pay up all the way up for a receiver or a tight end in McBride's case, they are a little bit more hesitant to double stack. And like, look, that obviously makes sense to some degree, right? Like if Chase has one of his 12 for 202 games, it's going to be hard for anyone else on Cincinnati to get there. So it's not that it doesn't make at least some sense, but the decision that people have so often made this year in that kind of situation is, okay, if I'm not going to double stack it, I might as well just mini stack this and then go find a cheap double stack that helps me fit that. And again, like in theory, that makes sense. But when so many people are doing that, it becomes really bad, because now you're threading this really thin needle. So I think that that's the primary mistake that people are going to make on this slate, is trying to find mini stacks, particularly like the McBride and Chase mini stack. And I think we're going to see that all over the place. So I don't think there are going to be many builds that use McBride, but then say, okay, I guess I can't get to Chase here, because I think so many builds are going to actually start with that mini stack and then figure out what they do around it.
Well, the more I think about it out loud, actually, is, now I think what could happen, to your point, way back when we first started talking about this Cincy Bengals or the Cincy Arizona game, is I actually think we're going to see more Michael Carter steam. Because now that I think about it, it'd be like, okay, Strange fits the tight end. So let's say they go with Lawrence, one of those three, if not two, of Myers, Thomas Jr., and Washington after the big game. Strange. Now it's Jonathan Taylor. Now it's Genty. Well, it's like they could actually just do Michael Carter and land on one of the Cincy guys, and maybe it's Chase that fits it or something like that. And then you have Chase and Taylor, because people have seen Chase have big games too, where it's like he's not even the primary focus of like 3 touchdowns or something, but it's like he still gets 12 targets. So I actually think, and I didn't look if it fits, but I think you could see something like that as well, where people still feel like they're covering the angle. So it just makes me think, to round out thoughts on the common build, it makes me think that Michael Carter could get steamed a little bit more because he still fits both versions of the build, the game stack build to make it all work, or the builds with like Trevor Lawrence or whoever else. Is there anything else you want to touch on there, a defense or anything else to see with the common build? If not, let's move right to how we're going to leverage this and other angles we can attack from.
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay. I see currently, just of note, I see Steelers, Browns, both those defenses, and then it looks like Patriots if people are paying up. Is that kind of what you got? Yeah. So
and I think let's see. Yeah, Steelers, Patriots. I also think the Giants could end up a lot more popular than people are expecting, just because if you don't have Genty, it makes so much sense to use the Giants, and there aren't any other like good options under $3,000. So they could end up being a lot more popular just because the Sims are going to like them.
Maybe play your Eagles under $3,000. That could be a way to do it this week. $2,600.
I think they're a really good option, and actually they could end up steaming because right now Roth is saying that there's going to be heavy rain in that Philly game. So if it's going to get sloppy, then people could end up playing either defense from that game.
Yeah, I'd have no problem. I mean, I don't know if they could get steamed enough. We'll see. But at 2,600, I think they're a fine option down low. So yeah, what
we haven't seen a defense do really well against Buffalo. Like Houston in that standalone game had like 8 sacks against him or something like that. So it's definitely possible. Jalen Carter also back for Philly.
Yeah, good call on that as well, for sure. That's interesting too about the James Cook theory in this one, because obviously Philly, showing up a little bit bad against the run, but it's like when you're missing your main dude for a lot of those games, it doesn't help you either. So certainly something like that. Okay, let's move to the second part. Then we kind of got the common build figured out now, and I think most figured that part of it. It's going to be more exciting to go through this next 20 minutes or so. But just to note, the Patriots factor. I mean, not that I wanted to start there, but someone talking about it again about I guess we got to wait and see. But with Henderson questionable, like I don't know, the Patriots feels like what the Raiders are doing, and it's just they're actually going to do it. They're not going to. It seems like they could leave Henderson out here. We'll have to wait and see, but it seems like they could end up going without him, but maybe not. But I think the only motivation for them is like Drake May MVP, right? Is to come out and just
seems that way, yeah.
Lock that MVP down, and obviously having a team like the Jets to go up against is certainly a good spot. But any thoughts on that one? And then where do you want to go with leveraging the common build first? Because I know the chat talked earlier about Geno stacks with moving off Genty. Is that the first place you want to go? But let me hear your Patriots thoughts quick. We can tie these in.
Yeah, I mean, look, like they're still live for the 1 seed, but it should be such an easy win against the Jets that like they might shut things down and put the backups in late in the third quarter or something like that in this one. So it's going to be hard for them to play to the ceiling. The other thing I don't like is one of my first thoughts of how to play this slate was like a Drake May double with Achane Mitchell as the bring back. The problem is the Patriots have been so good at preventing explosive passes that, my favorite, actually, well, one of my favorite props of the week over our underdog is under 29.5 longest completion for Cook, because they don't throw explosive passes and the Patriots don't allow explosive passes. So I just really, really like that one. But that means that Achane Mitchell has a much more difficult path to getting there, and it's a lot harder for the Jets to, fluke into a long touchdown that now does push New England a little bit. So that stack just, I think what I'm going to end up doing is if I play a Patriot, it's going to be a one-off wide receiver, most likely either Diggs or Kyle Williams.
Yeah, Kyle Williams as a one-off at 3,300 seems pretty fine. Like he seems fine on this slate, because I know people say, well, wouldn't you want to pair him up? Not necessarily, and I don't see him getting any crazy steam. So it's like if he is the one piece, if you think the Patriots are going to do something with him and they have injuries already and he's cheap enough that he doesn't quite kill you, and if he has a big game, it can be meaningful because he's not going to be very high owned. I think that's where I'd be more comfortable going. Diggs is 5,800. It's not like he's expensive, so I think he's fine as well. But to your point, either of those two would make a little bit more sense. Now, if Henderson was out, how much ownership do you think goes to somebody else, like Stevenson or something like that? What do you sort of see happening there if that's the case?
Yeah, Stevenson would be massive chalk. I think there's even a chance that he'd end up more popular than Genty, and I think that he would largely deserve that ownership. So I don't even know if I would fade it, but hopefully we don't have to make that decision, and hopefully that's just kind of a wash, because I've already, this morning, I already did an entire run through the ownership projections, taking ownership from Stevenson and figuring out where to dish that out. I don't want to have to reverse that all the way again.
Such is the life, right? Like that's how it goes. But somebody mentioned about the other side on the Jets. One, like, again, another hilarious piece would just be Jeremy Ruckert, same price as Meyer. They actually just paid him. I know, which sounds crazy, but they did just give him a contract. And now Mason Taylor out. It's like, if they're missing linebackers for the Patriots, could be a garbage time, whatever. But at 2,500, you could do worse. And just noting it, obviously he's not going to project like Michael Meyer, but I could see that happening at 2,500. Not something I'm super thrilled about, but just of note. All right, let's start with the Geno conversation, because I think if everything stays the same, and to your point and all of that, I don't think there's anything crazy about having this conversation, with the fact that Genty could get to 50%, 60% even in these single entries that we're talking about. So what is your thoughts on the Geno Smith side of things? I didn't see the update on Jack Besh. I know he was questionable, and I think he hit the injury report on Friday, but it seemed like it was minor. So I already know Trey Tucker's being talked about. We know Michael Myers being talked about. You can stack Geno with both of them or add in somebody else. Anything there with the Geno side of things?
Pat and Davis talked about this stack, and it's like the vast majority of people who will go to this stack are not going to it because they think, oh, Geno is going to have a huge game here. They're going to it because they think, if I just get mediocre production from this stack of Geno, Tucker, and Meyer, then goodness, I can fit like 4 different studs. I think they had Chase, McBride, and JSN in the lineup all together when they did this. So like it's absolutely viable for that purpose. And again, the Giants defense is really, really bad. They do allow explosive play. So this is as good a spot as we'll find all season for Trey Tucker. I can't say I'm super into it though, just because I think there are very attractive game environments on this slate. And I think there are like really solid plays on this slate at the quarterback and wide receiver position. So I think there's too much opportunity cost there for me to go this route, but it's really hard to argue. Like they are all good values, I think.
Yeah, I still have trouble with like the Chase McBride with another stack thing though, because like if it truly does break it, it's like, man, those guys had to have the bigger game. I guess almost say no, not necessarily because the 9-game slate. It is everything. Anything is possible. This is Kevin Garnett screaming into the abyss when they win the championship. Like anything is possible. Yes, but just noting it, it's like that's what makes it tricky. And it's also, I don't know if it's that sneaky. Like I think the realistic way is like if Genty fails, it could be the whole offense does, and then it is just like shut it down. Not actually shut it down, but like just the way the game goes. It's like it just kind of plays out, and that could be something with the Giants D, like you said, even if they get a little bit of steam, but that could make sense from that perspective. That could be to your Arizona point earlier, of like how that game, if the game actually flipped in that game, it could be good. In this game, it could be bad for the Raiders. It could be like Tracy and the Giants start putting a stomp down on them and just do it that way. And it is what it is. So I don't know. I have different thoughts on it. The Geno stack is obviously going to look good, but I think it's going to look good to a lot of people. And I already know Genty's ownership. We already know Myers' ownership. I think Trey Tucker's already getting steamed a little bit. I mean, as a one-off, I don't love it, but I won't say I wouldn't use it because it's a 15%er versus a 50%er. It's not like that's where I'm okay with it. It's not going to be the same as your Kyle Williams at low ownership, but I'm just noting it's like once the Geno stack hits, feel like a lot of other stuff hits with it. And then it's kind of, you either have it or you don't. So keep that in mind. But if you only have one build, it's not going to be too different once you go there, I think.
So everything you just said gives me kind of 2 strong thoughts on this one. The first is, if you're playing Geno stuff, you need to have at least one Giants bring back, and you might even want 2, because the script where this really works and actually leverages Genty instead of also helping Genty because the offense is successful is if the Giants jump out to a big lead as improbable as that sounds, the Giants jumping out to a big lead. But if they were to do that, and now you say, okay, Genti can't get to 20 carries. He's going to end up with 8 to 10 carries because they're just not going to be able to run the ball all game. And Geno's able to get there in garbage time. Like, that's the path where Geno's stack is successful and really does a nice job of leveraging Genti. The second thing is, you mentioned that, okay, I don't want Chase McBride without that game anyway. Okay, so if you are saving this much money with this stack, instead of paying for Chase McBride, pay for the running backs.
Yes.
Pay for Achane, pay for Cook or Saquon, pay for Jonathan Taylor, although personally I don't think Taylor's a very good play because the matchup's really bad, but pay for Achane especially, and just do it that way. Maybe you go Achane and JSN or something like that. So you're still getting the benefit of, okay, I can now pay up for all this upside and all these, kind of automatic points from these superstars, but you're not doing it in a way where you're helping that Arizona-Cincinnati game get there.
Yeah, the second point you nailed spot on, and it's going to lead to my lane later on. We might be in the same lane this week. I don't know, but just noting it, it's last show of the year. So I will say that your second point was bang on with what I was going to say. Is that here's the interesting factor: whether you go, and honestly, I'll talk about it from both sides. So you go if you fade Genti and go Smith, Tucker, Meyer, Slayton. Okay, yeah. You still have you have 2 running back slots and a flex left wide open, and it doesn't like everyone just thinks, oh, I better get to that Chase McBride spot. No, what about getting to something totally different and flipping the build that way? Like we talk about from a DFS perspective, not like just a game flip. So I think that's important. And even on the other side, it can work. If you wanted to go Dart, Robinson, and Theo, or Dart, when we've seen Robinson have big games, it's almost as often as Genti. Not very often, but when it is, it's a big game with his quarterback. And so maybe it's Dart, Robinson, and it's like Theo for $900 more than Meyer. And you can put Trey Tucker into that, and Trey Tucker and Wandale, are like your 2 highest owned guys that like nothing. Wandale, I always say that with them, but yeah, Wandale Robinson, if you put him in there, you could see it. But that build leaves you in a different spot. You're out on the most popular play on the slate in this example with Genti, and then you're in on a build that is the opposite build of like the McBride and all, and you just say that game spreads out too much or fails in some way, shape, or form where not enough people are going to have it in the right way or comfortably. And so I'm good with where I'm at. And so I love that call out there. What else? What do you want to go to next on sort of talking about leveraging the common build? What else do you got?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of almost a reiteration of what I just said, which is a lot of the theme that we've talked about here on the common build is the fact that the expensive running backs aren't as appealing this week, but they are still, expensive running backs with a lot of upside. And so I think one way to leverage the common build this week is to just say, screw it. I'm going to do what we've been doing all year and play the expensive running backs, pair Achane with, someone from the Philly game, or even with, you could even like play Genti in that way, right? Where you go Achane, Genti, and then another expensive running back. And now Achane's actually the cheapest running back instead of one of the more expensive running backs that I think, is going to show up in a lot of builds where people are really using Genti as maybe even the most expensive running back that they have so that they can pay up at the other positions. So yeah, I think that's kind of just the other like big picture way to leverage the slate that I think stands out to me.
Yeah, I think that's key. So when we go to these other game stacks, we already had the Patriots talk, we had the Jaguars talk, we talked through those ones. The other games obviously aren't very appealing when it comes to the stacks. I think you mentioned it earlier, but I guess the battle of the Titans versus the Saints, 2 other really bad teams, I definitely still have interest. Like I know it's going to pick up some steam, but if you're able to play like Tyler Shuck, Olave, Jawan, like last week, they all had massive games. And they did not. Olave did, of course, but obviously Taysom Hill throwing him that last touchdown. I mean, he's only 2,700 again. He crushed at 2,500 last week. That might be something people are thinking about too. If you're landing on Michael Meyer, $200 more, go play some Taysom Hill at 2,700. They seem very content continuing to use him. But the Titan side, I mean, I think the difference, and you and I had good conversation about this the last couple of weeks, is like people are always like, oh, but I don't know who to play. It's not really about if you have to play someone from them at all, it's do you believe they can keep up in this game or force a back and forth? And I just think for sort of one of the last games of the season, a good chance for Tennessee to get another win. Same for the Saints, both sides. I think both the records are identical, I believe 2-13. It does seem like you could see we've seen these types of games go back and forth before where it's like, oh, two of the shittiest teams actually put up two of the bigger scores and fantasy scores because their receivers, their tight ends, everybody, running backs, they're all RB1s, wide receiver ones, but just for such bad teams. So any thoughts on this one here?
Yeah, I agree there. And then the last thing that I'll say on just how to leverage the common build this week is I think like there's obviously a temptation, and honestly, it's one of the more fun aspects of building lineups in DFS is like, okay, but I want to find the stack that nobody's on that could end up going off. And that's a really fun thing to do, and it's an especially fun thing to hit on. But the best answer this week might just be, okay, who is the really under-owned guy within the chalk stack? When I look through like all of the stacks on this slate, basically every single one of them has a low-owned option that has some upside, right? So in the Arizona game, you've got Harrison and Michael Wilson. They're both going to be low-owned. In the Indianapolis and Jacksonville game, I think Parker Washington, Brian Thomas Jr., Alec Pierce, all three of those guys are going to be pretty low-owned. So as I look through the slate, like I just think this might be a week where you say, how can I turn a chalk stack into a contrarian stack? More so than you say, what is the stack that everyone's overlooking and actually has a great chance of hitting?
Yeah, and if you're, the especially great way to do that is if you're not in on the most popular game, there's a lot of secondary versions that we talked about that you can now turn into really good secondary versions that maybe you feel more comfortable with than converting the Bengals stack into a Burrow, P. Ryan, Yoshi Voss stack where it's like, that might be a bit much, right? Like you could do this in these other places much easier. You just mentioned some guys with like Pierce. There was no way he could have a good game last week, and then he goes off and crushes. I think you knew he was going to have a good game, if I recall correctly, but Alec Pierce, that is, he had a really solid game, but everyone's like, oh, he's not catching a deep ball from Rivers, and it's not that he even needed to. Like the way they used him that game was just totally different. He was able to get there just fine. So he's 4,700 up. Parker Washington, you mentioned, off a big week, but not popular. Everyone else off a big week is super popular. Burrow and Genty and all these different guys. Like those are the ones that people are moving towards. Lawrence, people are sticking with, but they're not necessarily sticking with the guy that just had the big game and made him have a big game against Denver. What if they go back out and reward him again and say, hey, you were open then. You should definitely be open now. We can get you set up. And I think not that people are super high on this guy any longer, but I think Sauce is back, right, for Indy.
I'm honestly not even sure.
I'd have to look it up, or somebody. Maybe I'm missing that, but I'm pretty sure I read. What was it? No.
Yeah, Sauce is returning, but Buckner remains out.
Yeah, that's what it was. So again, whatever people want to say about that, but my point being, if he's, I don't know, maybe following around BTJ more or McMyers or whatever it ends up being, like maybe Parker Washington could have a better game. So I do like your call out of people recognizing that there still is only 9 games. There is a superior game that everybody likes and wants to go to. And then the main point would be is you can still get to some of these secondary games, but have better conviction around different ways to build around those games than in the game everybody wants to build in. Because that goes to your point earlier of like me having one lineup in the ultimate, for example, if I end up with just the one, it's like you don't really have a lot of choice. But me building around that Cincy Arizona game is going to be covered 6 ways from South. There's going to be, everyone's going to have that build times 5, times 7, times 10, whatever they do to get in on it. If it hits, it hits. And some people say, well, if it hits, you're going to need it. True, but I'm not going to play that way because it's not how I play. So I won't be on that game stack as a whole. And there actually is a chance I don't have anybody from that game in my lineup just because I'm going to hope for the chaos. And even if they do put up points, maybe not in a way that is needed. And there's other ways that you can get there. So all right. Anything else? And if not, I'm really worried because I assume you have it, but I'll let you take it. It is, the last show of the year. We have our big announcement coming up next, but let me hear your leverage lane for week 17.
This is another week where I'm struggling to kind of narrow in on a specific leverage lane, but I will kind of follow the thought that has kind of developed over the course of the show, which is I want to pay up at running back. And for the second straight week, I think Devon Achane is a phenomenal play. So Achane's going to be my leverage lane here. Tampa is a pass funnel. We know that has been true about them for a while now, but it's also true that they are weakest in the run game against the outside zone. Well, Achane loves outside zone, and he breaks a lot of explosive plays. And Tampa also has a vulnerability in the run game against explosive runs. They shut down a lot of run plays, but they also give up a lot of explosives in the run game. We actually have Miami projected for the highest explosive rush rate of the entire week at 16.8%. That is a big percentage. And I think, Achane is once again going to be super underowned here. I think he's easily the best of the spend up running backs. And the fact that he's just a little bit more expensive than the rest is going to make him even that much more underowned, where I think we have him projected at like 12%, 11%, something like that. It wouldn't shock me if the game starts and I open the DraftKings app and, oh my God, I have Achane at 4% or something crazy like that. So Achane is going to be my leverage lane, which, I don't usually like making my leverage lane just one specific player, but I think part of the point here is if I'm using Achane, if I'm paying up for the most expensive running back on this particular slate, it's going to make the rest of my roster construction naturally contrarian because I'm spending this much money at a position that other people are trying to save money.
Yeah. So we did have the same. And it was, I think you nailed it though. That was what I was going to get to, is like, usually it's actually because I'm not set on the stack yet. So I'm going to give a separate one, and I will use this at least somewhere. I can't commit to 100% say I'll use it in my 33-33 because I'll think about it, but I'll go to it in a second. But to your point, it wasn't just the Achane factor. It's the $8,500 running back on a week when a lot of the setup is going to be with Genty and a cheaper running back and a 2 tight end build. And that's, I mean, I could just say that too. It's unlikely that it's a 2 tight end build for my main, but just of note, one stack I'll bring up, and I talked a little bit about it earlier. I tried it out last week. It was very close to me. Good. The namesake, Tyler Shuck. I'm going to go back to these Saints. I do think that it was very condensed. You can go to that side of it. I actually don't even have anything against like a Tony Pollard on the other side and the way he's been working around things, and he's 5,500, which sort of fits in. If I go to this game, it's very likely that I just avoid Arizona Cincy altogether. You could still fit in an Achane. You could fit in other studs or whatever you want to put into it. But I like Shuck. I like Jawan Johnson at 4,200. I like Tony Pollard at 5,500. I think when two bad teams face off, you can sometimes see sparks fly fantasy points wise, and back and forth in this game, I think could be a little bit interesting. I don't think it'll be the lowest owned, but I also think that there's enough plays, games, stacks, things like that well in front of it, where I think that's where I'm more than fine getting away with it. It kind of actually hits on your point earlier of I'm not going to secondary options within this game stack. It would probably be the more popular spot within this, but you're down the chain of that, back to Achane, but you're down that chain a little bit of where people are actually going on this slate. And even if Tyler Shuck's 7 to 10% and Olave's 15 to 20 or somewhere in that range, and Jawan Johnson's up there a bit, not everybody can be owned. And so you're still leaving out some of these big options. So I'll give that for mine. I'm with you 100% on Achane. I really like that spot this week. Somebody said, who's the run back? Don't have to run it back. I mean, you could just have them. You could have him with the Miami defense. You could have Baker stacks with Baker, Evans. I mean, Evans looks really good again. He looked awesome last week.
Yeah,
After week for him.
I think Evans is the answer.
Yeah, if you're really picking one. I mean, then people say like, oh, the funny part is like that's kind of the cost almost of like a McBride and Chase. But the difference is no one's really going to have those games. I say no one lightly. Obviously, somebody will. I'm just saying when those two go off, it's not the same as when Jamar Chase and McBride go off and you say, well, of course I got them right, but I didn't have all those other pieces these guys had. Well, these guys or these other people built a ton of lineups and they had you covered, and that's the difference. So in single entry, there's still going to be a ton of game stacks that will be over the top of you versus if you have like a Baker or if you have a Evans and Achane or a Baker Evans Achane, you're going to be in a league of your own for the most part, or a very small portion of the league is going to have that in this example, and you're going to be able to find your way to the top in that model. So love that. All right. We got one announcement. Do you have anything else you want to hit on before I pull it up?
No, I think it's got.
All right. Let us know in the chat your feeling on this. We've been waiting a while to bring this up. People have given us a ton of really good feedback as the season went on. And we've been saying, if you caught it, we did the old dad joke of saying the last show of the year. That doesn't mean the last show that we're going to do, though. There's going to be another show coming up. I hope you're all very excited, but starting at the Sony Open for the PGA DFS season right here on the Ship It Nation YouTube station. Make sure to hit that thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed. Let us know in the comments your feelings and thoughts on this show upcoming. But I'm excited, Alex. We're coming back. We're bringing out the PGA DFS version. We got a ton of feedback all season long of people wanting us to do this, and I think this is going to be awesome. I'm very excited. Obviously, a long season with PGA, but I'm excited to do it with you, and I'm excited that we got the show each and every week coming out. It's going to be on Wednesdays, and current tentative, but it should stick, is 10:30 a.m. Eastern, so that if you can watch it live, great. If you can't, you can watch it on your lunch break, after work, on the way home, whatever it might be. Tons of time to get it in before lock on Thursday morning.
Yeah, I mean, look, like we obviously love NFL DFS, but I think we both might like PGA DFS even more than NFL. So this is going to be an absolute blast for the entire season, and I can't wait to talk about like a lot of the same principles. Like I don't think people who haven't tried PGA DFS realize how much carryover there is in terms of NFL DFS strategy to PGA DFS strategy. And a lot of what we've talked about this year, and like that has been unique to Leverage Lane when you compare it to a lot of the other NFL shows around the industry, like the conditional ownership stuff, the pairings, if you will, that plays a massive role in PGA DFS. So I think we've got a really nice edge over in PGA DFS, and I think we're gonna hopefully teach people how to take advantage of that all season. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it's going to be crazy. Like, a lot of people don't, that's actually where it's not who you play, it's how you play. I'm starting, not even in football, because it applies everywhere. But in DFS, it was always the point of like someone telling me you can't play John Rahm at the Mexico Open. Obviously Rahm over to live now, but just notice like you can't play him there. He's going to be 35% owned. It's like you can literally lock him if you want. You can play him in your single entry and get different. There's a ton of different stuff, but I know the two biggest pieces of feedback that we got, and we're thankful for everybody and appreciate all the support, but it was the two common themes were, one, there's not enough content based around single entry GPP Focus, right? Those are obviously the tournaments that most can get into. You can extrapolate the thought process up and down. MME is not for everybody. Even if you take our thoughts, you can still apply them. If you liked, hey, look, today we talked about the Geno Smith stacks. We talked about the Trevor Lawrence stacks, Tyler Shuck. It's like, well, I feel like I want to play 3 to 5x. Now you can. Now you've got some thoughts on how you might play the Shuck lineups. Now you got some thoughts on a Baker with Evans with Achane. Like you can go play 5 max, but the thought process has all been around single entry. That was the first piece, but the overwhelming piece that we got, and this is what we couldn't be more thankful for, was people just saying the combination of you and I together and doing this show and the chemistry and the back and forth and different thoughts and ideas and then putting them all together. So we're excited to be able to run that back. It makes quote unquote work very easy when it doesn't feel like work at all. I have a ton of fun doing this with you. It's like two buddies just shooting the shit back and forth, coming up with thoughts and ideas and putting them out there and hopefully helping others. And I think we've done a good job of that. So can't thank everybody enough. We appreciate all the support. We're excited to be able to run it back for PGA. No, but I would love to. Being honest, right? PGA show should be great. Break out the Mai Tais. I mean, there was a little, the Hawaii, the Century Tournament of Champions, they shut it down this year, but it will. I mean, my man Aaron, you've been here all day. I love you in the support, but will it be Leverage Lane Focus? It will literally be Leverage Lane for PGA DFS, the exact same show you're watching right now, my friend. So yeah, it'll be exactly what you expect, and everything you got from this show, just applying it to the PGA streets now. And there's a ton of good things going on in PGA throughout the season. It's a long season, right? You have big majors, you have all these other different things, and so we think Wednesdays are good. You get enough information by then obviously you can go to the respective spots and find Alex's stuff, find our stuff. You'll be able to have all that. We'll bring all that into the fold and give you as much information as we can. And there'll be a ton of evergreen learnings as well that you could just apply just to become a better PGA DFS player and hopefully more successful, more profitable. That's really what it's all about. Alex, any other thoughts, any final thoughts? And then let people know where they can find you for the rest of this week and the rest of the NFL season.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else. It's going to be so much fun talking PGA. And I think, the nice thing too about PGA, like you said, it's where a lot of like these kind of thoughts we've talked about all season have really originated for us, where I know like I found a ton of success in PGA DFS before I found success in other DFS sports. And a lot of the reason why I've been successful in other DFS sports since are because I said, okay, well, what can I apply to NFL DFS or MLB DFS that I have learned and that has made me successful in PGA DFS. So I think hopefully we do a pretty good job of like naturally talking about the strategy in NFL DFS here throughout the year on Leverage Lane. I think what you guys might find is that the conversation is even more natural and free flowing in PGA DFS because it's where a lot of our thoughts and strategies have originated. So I can't wait for the season as a whole. I can't wait for the Sony Open January 14th or whatever it is. And yeah, I can't wait to get rolling. But as always, you can find my stuff at Alex Blickle 1 on Twitter, whether you want the GPP scores and ownership over at FTN or you want kind of the advanced DFS theory, props, and pick 'em that I've got over in my Discord.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I think the other fun part is that from a single entry perspective, I mean, two things. One, if you don't play PGA DFS, this will be a good reason for you to start because you can check this show out for free and follow along. And obviously we know what we're talking about. You'll be able to find that out. But the main thing is when I first started playing DFS as a whole, it was always just golf and then NFL because it's like you have all week to work on it. Like when golf, even when football was on at the same time as golf, like it still technically will be with the divisional round playoffs upcoming. It's like you can do a lot of stuff at night, whether you have a significant other, kids, full-time job, whatever it might be, you can get into the PGA DFS streets and it's pretty easy to get the concept of it. It's then the game theory and the leverage and putting it all together. That's what the show is going to be about. And then taking the tools and applying them from there. But the other thing is it's a little bit different than NFL. Like to your point earlier, actually a great one of today, just a little tidbit or spoiler, I guess, is like when you say, oh, well, we won't want to have one lineup versus everybody else having a bunch. Well, in football, that's really tricky because there's like game stacks are going to crush you, all of this. And it can be tricky, like to Scotty Scheffler or not to Scotty Scheffler. But it's when you have one lineup, you can still feel really comfortable in PGA DFS. And even if that's how you just get your feet wet and get started, that's what I would suggest. But yeah, I think if you don't play PGA DFS already, you'll want to start playing it. It's a great sport. It's grown a ton in the last couple of years of people coming over from these other sports because just recognizing, okay, I got to pick 6 golfers and then start applying some of the other theory and process to it makes it a ton of fun. There's a lot of good data and tools and things like that you can bring into it. So yeah, should be a ton of fun. If you guys want to join us over at Ship It Nation, you can do so. The code's up there, SHIP19, 5 days for $19. Go Collect says no late swap. It's pretty sweet to set it and forget it, except when Decky throws out his back and his neck and his back post lock. Yeah, it happens. But
there's one other aspect of PGA that I think is super fun, which is the satellites and the qualifiers. I think we might end up talking even more about like our strategy and how we kind of attack those, because in NFL, the satellites and qualifiers, like sometimes they set them for random weeks and specific showdowns, things of that nature, or here in week 17. But in PGA, every single satellite is super specifically targeted for the Players Championship. And then once you get through the Players, it's for the Masters. And then once you get through the Masters, it's for the PGA Championship, right? And so it's so segmented that way, and you know what you're trying for. And you made an awesome point there, which is if you have one lineup up against, Utica playing 100 in NFL, he's going to do all sorts of like inverse correlation things between his lineups that really boost his win probability at your expense. In PGA, you can't really do that. And so in PGA, if you only have one ticket and you're playing, 700 other people or 3,000 other lineups, you're not at a severe disadvantage for that fact. So the satellite strategy, the ticket strategy, it's even more powerful in PGA. And I think there's also an element there of like, you get a lot of non-PGA DFS players who are really good at DFS and have a lot of money, and they'll just say, all right, I'm going to go play the Mega Milli this week, even though I don't know a damn thing about PGA because it's the Masters and I want to watch. And so maybe the competition also isn't quite as strong as it is in NFL. So basically like every single reason to love NFL DFS is kind of magnified for PGA.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot of fun. I think, like I said, if nothing else, this will be a way that you can sort of get your feet wet. It's one lineup. You can throw it in if you're playing, following what we're talking about, a single entry. You can put in a single entry tournament of any dollar value that fits your bankroll. If you have FOMO and want to throw it into the lottery still, because it could still win that, go ahead. And if you want to put it in your satellite, you can do that as well. Obviously, different thought processes and different camps on all of those things, but that's what we'll be talking about. So Showdown is great as well. We don't have a Showdown version of this, but we'll have more PGA DFS news from Ship It Nation in the first week of January leading in. So we'll let you guys know that when we get there. This has been awesome, guys. We really appreciate you so much. We were excited we could do this, bring Leverage Lane out this season and launch this show. It's been an awesome season. Week 18, a bit of a shit show, as most know. We'll still be covering it at Ship It Nation. He'll be covering it at FTN and with his stuff in his Discord for Alex, but just noting it, no Leverage Lane for next week. We will be back January 14th for the Sony Open for the PGA DFS series debut of Leverage Lane for PGA DFS. That's going to do it for this season, guys. For Alex, for myself, ToeTagginTambo, thank you for watching, and let's ship it.